my spouse is being unfaithful to me. It all began when I had to take a step back from work due to my declining health. Before long, my condition worsened, and I was forced to quit my job and stay at home while my wife, Alice, continued working to support our family. Despite this, Alice and I had a strong bond and were happy together. We come from a simple suburban neighborhood and had a traditional upbringing. Our families have been friends for as long as we can remember. We both went to a Christian school and then to college, where we started dating in high school and fell in love for the first time. As we went through college, our relationship only grew stronger, and we were there for each other through thick and thin. We have a 7-year-old son together. My wife and I had a strong, loving relationship with a healthy, intimate life, until recently, prehistory. One day, Alice had to go on a business trip for training at another location for her company, which wasn't a common occurrence, but it did happen. We were packing her suitcase, going through the normal routine of making sure she had everything she needed, when I realized I had forgotten to grab her pajamas from the laundry room. She quickly got up to retrieve the pajamas, eager to make sure she had everything she needed for her trip. I had an idea to brighten up her day. I wanted to surprise her with a special touch, so I took a moment to write a love note from both myself and our son. The letter was filled with declarations of our love and adoration for her, expressing how much we missed her and couldn't wait for her to return home. As I gathered her belongings and placed them back in the suitcase, I couldn't help but notice something strange. It was a piece of lingerie, absolutely stunning in its design and detail, but it was completely unfamiliar to me. I was taken aback, wondering where it could have come from and why it was mixed in with her things. Alice typically wears practical undergarments, free from any lace, patterns, or frills. But this piece of lingerie was different. It was a corset, adorned with delicate decorations and intricate details. In that moment, a jolt of surprise ran through me as I realized the potential implications of this discovery. I was devastated to think that my wife may be cheating on me. Despite the heartache I felt, I decided to keep my thoughts to myself, at least for the time being. Alice returned with the laundry, and we closed the suitcase and went to bed. However, she showed signs of wanting to be intimate, but I told her that I couldn't, citing my health issues as the reason. Although my body may have been willing, my mind was too consumed with the hurt and betrayal I felt to act on it. The entire night was filled with tumultuous thoughts as I tried to figure out the best way to approach the situation. I toyed with the idea of removing the suspicious lingerie from her suitcase, but quickly dismissed it as a temporary solution to a much larger problem. By dawn, I had a plan in mind. I had to drive Alice to work in the morning, and then take her to the airport a few hours later for her business trip. In preparation for her departure, I made a quick trip to the store to purchase something. I wrote her a note, subtle yet pointed, and placed it amongst the lingerie and protection kit in her suitcase. I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for her to come across my message, as her trip was only slated to last 2 days. Business trip days. On the first day, she called me, seemingly unaffected by any guilt or wrongdoing, and we had a cordial conversation. However, I couldn't shake off the pain I was feeling, and our conversation lacked any real excitement or enthusiasm. I was on edge waiting to see if she had found my letter. On the second day, her calls stopped, and I knew something was wrong. As I was tucking in our son for bed, she called to say goodnight to him. Afterward, our son handed me the phone, but she hung up immediately. My son said she sounded really sad. I called her back and we briefly talked. I said to her, "I'll call you later if you're not busy," with a firm emphasis on busy. When she didn't respond, I repeated the statement. Alice abruptly ended the call. A little while later, I tried calling her again and found her crying on the other end. Once she calmed down and stopped crying, I told her that we needed to have a serious... I had many questions and wanted to know the details of her infidelity, such as who she was with, where it happened, and when it occurred. I kept quiet and let her speak, carefully listening to her every word until she finished her story. Alice had been promoted and was now traveling for work to lead training sessions. The company would always put its employees up in luxurious, five-star hotels near their workplace, complete with elegant rooms, a restaurant, and a bar. She explained that after her first training session, the whole team went out to a restaurant to relax and catch up with each other, but not to talk about work. After work, some colleagues invited her to go to a bar, and she agreed to join them. At the bar, she witnessed a striking scene. A woman sat alone at the bar, chatting with the bartender, when a man approached her and offered to buy her a drink. They chatted for a while and then left together, heading to the woman's room. Alice was taken aback by how easy it was for the woman to find a partner for the night. She had never seen anything like this before, as she and I were never interested in frequenting bars and nightclubs. After each work training session, Alice followed the same routine. Dinner with co-workers, followed by a trip to a bar. On the second night, she saw the same woman from the previous evening at the bar, now being approached by another man who bought her a drink before the two of them disappeared to a hotel room. Alice told me that she was fascinated by the encounter and started to have fantasies about it. She explained that the idea of having a one-night stand with a stranger filled both her own desires and her fantasies. I was shocked. This pattern continued for the next 5 business trips. Later, her business trips came to an end, and she didn't travel for a long time. Alice said she felt deprived as she missed that kind of sexual experience. When being intimate with me, she couldn't find complete satisfaction. The truth is, we never talked about our desires with each other. In our relationship, it was the norm to keep these kinds of topics quiet and not discuss them. So she felt that sleeping with someone else wasn't considered cheating because it was just physical gratification, while she had an emotional bond with me. 2 months ago, Alice embarked on a new adventure, her first business trip in what felt like an eternity. She was excited to be back on the road, traveling to new cities and meeting new people. She was only gone for 2 short days, but she had a packed schedule, work, dinner, and drinks at the bar. According to her, on the first night at the bar, she felt insecure after comparing herself to the other women in the establishment. The next day, she took action by purchasing a corset, and by that evening, she was already wearing it at the bar. As she took a seat at the bar, she didn't have to wait long before a man approached her and struck up a conversation. He seemed charming and charismatic, and before she knew it, he was inviting her to his room. However, at that moment, Alice's excitement quickly turned to disgust as she realized that she wasn't comfortable with what was happening. She didn't want to be just another conquest, used for someone's pleasure. In that moment, she realized that she needed to be true to herself and not compromise her values for fleeting attention from a stranger. She showed the man her wedding ring and said that she was married. He told her something like, "We won't tell anyone about this, it'll be our little secret." But she got up and went to her room alone. She swears that's exactly what happened, but I kind of doubt it. And now we move on to her last business trip, the one when I noticed the corset in her suitcase. Alice went to training in another city, checked into the hotel, worked, and prepared materials for the training. And before she went on, she noticed my note and the condoms. She immediately called her son because she realized she couldn't talk to me after everything that had happened. Alice claimed that she simply forgot to put away the corset after the last conference when she bought it, and that all her physical contacts were long gone. She also said that her conference went very badly because she was sitting all the time and couldn't find a place for herself. Then she started crying and apologizing again. I told her that we would talk when she arrived. A day later, walking towards the arrival's gate, the airport was a hive of activity with people coming and going. My son and I were on the lookout for Alice, eagerly scanning the crowd for any sign of her. The anticipation was palpable, with my son practically bouncing with excitement, eager to see his beloved mother once again. Finally, the moment arrived, and Alice stepped into view, and my son let out a joyful cry as he ran towards her, wrapping her in a warm embrace. I stood there, observing the reunion from a distance, and felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. Despite everything that had happened between us, my love for her still burned brightly, and I longed for her return. Driving home, I tried to gather my thoughts and prepare for what was to come. I didn't want our son to be involved in any of the drama, so I took him to his grandparents' house. so that he wouldn't have to overhear what was going to be a tough conversation. The drive home was quiet, with the only sound coming from the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Alice as she tried to compose herself. I could tell that she was bracing herself for what was to come, and I knew that it wouldn't be an easy conversation, but one that was necessary if we were going to move forward as a family. That same evening when I got home, Alice had already set the table. I wasn't interested in food, so I cleared everything from the table and asked her to sit down. We sat down opposite each other, as if in negotiations, and started the discussion. I asked her to be honest with me and not lie. Otherwise, I could offer her a lie detector test. Alice agreed and promised to be truthful. For more information, I printed out all her phone conversations and correspondence so that we could go over each point and I could finally find out the whole truth. I could see the tension in her face as I probed deeper into the story she had told me, trying to piece together the events of her business trip. I asked specific questions, trying to get a clear understanding of what had happened and to determine if her story was consistent with the facts. At first, she seemed taken aback by my questioning, as if she felt I was doubting her honesty. But I knew Alice too well. I knew that she has always been truthful with me, never once lying or even stretching the truth, even in small ways. I had seen her face this same dilemma many times before. When faced with the choice of being dishonest or avoiding the question, she would always take a moment to carefully consider her answer. With this knowledge in mind, I repeated my questions, trying to read her reactions and determine if she was being truthful or not. Afterwards, I brought up the topic of the black lacy lingerie I had found in her suitcase. Alice explained the same thing she had before, that she wanted to look more appealing and feel more confident. She also mentioned a movie she had watched while I was napping earlier that day that had inspired her to make the purchase. I continued to press her on why she hung up the phone before speaking to me when she returned from her business trip. Alice finally confessed that she felt overwhelmed after finding my note and the condoms in her room and didn't know how to talk to me about it. So she called our son to gather her thoughts before speaking to me. I probed further, asking her to recount the details of her encounter with the man at the bar. Her voice shook as she confessed that she was dangerously close to giving in to temptation and following him back to his room. She had managed to resist by showing off her wedding ring, but his nonchalant response of not revealing anything if she didn't go was almost enough to push her over the edge. She admitted that she was teetering on her chair, ready to go, but something deep down inside held her back. When I pressed her to explain what it was, she simply whispered that it was her conscience. Despite the inner turmoil, she had still considered giving in to temptation. Our conversation continued late into the night, lasting until the wee hours of Sunday morning. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something I was missing, so I delved deeper into her phone and scoured it for any signs of infidelity. However, I came up empty-handed. The phone records showed no unusual numbers or deleted messages that would suggest anything was amiss. I even called some numbers that Alice couldn't recall, but they all turned out to belong to harmless businesses or entities. The thing that troubled me the most was the idea of emotional and physical thing being separate. I grilled Alice on this topic, trying to understand her thought process. For me, our encounters were always a deep expression of our love for each other. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of physical connection being anything other than a manifestation of our emotional bond. Alice finally confessed that sometimes, during intimate moments with me, her mind would wander, and she would imagine being with another man, but she couldn't bring herself to imagine his face. After a couple of days, as my spouse and I hail from devout families, we were active members of our church community and regularly attended services. During a conversation with our pastor after church service, I asked for his guidance on a personal matter affecting our family. We scheduled a private meeting with him and awaited his instructions. He also told us about a marriage retreat program being hosted by local churches in September, complete with guest speakers and interactive workshops aimed at improving relationships and resolving issues. The thought of finding a marriage counselor even crossed my mind. With a strong resolve, I decided to fight for our marriage and family. Despite her heartfelt apology and obvious remorse, I couldn't shake off the uncertainty that lingered between us. Alice and I have known each other for almost our entire lives, and I was familiar with her tendencies and behaviors. However, we still felt it necessary to seek guidance from our pastor and had scheduled a marital consultation for the following September. We were determined to face any potential infidelity head-on and work towards repairing our relationship. As days passed, Alice and I slowly returned to our familiar routines, no longer awkwardly avoiding each other as we had in the aftermath of the events. Our bond began to mend, particularly since we have a son and wanted to provide him with a stable, loving home. My wife and I decided to seek the support of our families during a difficult time in our relationship. We were grateful for their understanding and discretion as they listened and provided comfort during this challenging period. In an effort to strengthen our bond, we followed the advice of our pastor and started praying together. Despite this newfound peace, I still had lingering doubts and questions about our relationship, especially when my wife had to travel for work. I hoped that attending family therapy would provide answers and help us work through these issues. In the meantime, we made an effort to spend quality time together as a family, going on picnics and other fun outings. 1 week later, finally, the day of our first family therapy session arrived and we both had a chance to open up and share our thoughts and feelings. I shared my need to understand what had happened and what led to the events that took place. Without getting into too many details, I discussed the pressure my wife faced as the main financial provider and the struggles that come with it. Alice also talked about the challenges she faced observing our son's growth and the stress it put on her. I acknowledged that my own personality added to this stress, and sometimes it became too much to handle. However, after the therapy, we started to see positive changes in our relationship and communication. We started talking more and more every day. Although there were instances of intimacy, I still had lingering concerns about the root cause of everything. After the therapy sessions, I was feeling hopeful that we were making progress. But one day, when my wife returned home, she seemed distant and not like her usual self. She went straight to bed after a quiet dinner and asked me not to disturb her, which was very out of character. I was curious and asked her what was wrong, but she just shook her head and said, "Soon." As the days passed, I grew increasingly worried about my wife's behavior. I tried to reach out to her and talk, but she was distant and unwilling to open up. I felt like I was losing her and I didn't know how to fix things. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The therapist suggested that I give her some space and let her process what she had discussed in her private session. However, as the weekend approached and she packed her bag to go stay with her parents, I couldn't help but feel like I was being left behind. I was desperate for answers and frustrated that the therapist couldn't give me any more guidance. It was a trying time for our relationship, and I was not sure what the future held. So finally, my wife and I had our next session with our counselor. As soon as she sat down and took my hand, she said she had some serious news to share. I could feel my heart drop as I braced myself for what was to come. Her voice quivered as she began to speak, and the words that came out of her mouth shattered my world. It turned out that Alice, the woman I had loved and trusted for so many years, had been unfaithful to me. She had been having an affair with a coworker from her study program at the office. The betrayal cut deep, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The revelation changed everything, and I didn't know if our relationship would ever be the same again. The black corset was meant for her lover. Both she and I were in tears as she confessed her continued dishonesty. Alice expressed regret for keeping this secret from me and revealed that the affair had started 2 years prior. They held similar job positions and were constantly communicating through emails, texts, and phone calls for work. As they got to know each other better, they started flirting, which eventually escalated to explicit conversations. One night during a work trip, they ended up going out to dinner, and later to her hotel room, where they became intimate. Despite promising each other that it wouldn't happen again, they continued their affair at every work trip. Her lover was already married. When I asked why she started to view me differently, I was told that it was because I was unable to work and she became the sole breadwinner. This was not how she was brought up, as her father was the provider while her mother stayed at home. My own family was similar, although my mother did eventually start working when I was older. Our bed life suffered when my health declined. When I asked her how she perceived me, she responded with weak and not fulfilling my responsibilities. Alice became emotional again. She then explained that when I returned to work a few weeks prior, she realized how much I loved her because she had previously mentioned feeling overwhelmed as the sole source of income. Despite not being at full health, this action changed her perception of me and motivated her to come clean. Until that point, my wife thought she could handle the counseling sessions and that I would be satisfied with the progress we were making. But the therapist saw right through her and suggested that she start individual counseling to be able to openly confess the truth, both to the therapist and eventually to me. After that, I've taken the difficult step of filing for divorce, and now I'm waiting for my wife's signature on the paperwork. Despite still having feelings for her, it's hard for me to trust her after everything that's happened. Alice is in the process of moving in with her parents, where she went last weekend to come clean to them and find a place to stay. We're still figuring out what's best for our son, as I want him to be with me, but at the same time, I need to work to support myself. However, with my current health concerns, I'm not sure if I'll be able to balance both work and taking care of him. It's a difficult situation, and I'm trying to navigate it the best way I can. As soon as my lease is up, I'm planning on packing my things and moving out. I'm hoping and praying that my job will still be there for me. This week, I took a day off from work, which my boss was fine with, but my partner wasn't too happy about it. One possibility I'm considering is moving in with my parents, which would drastically cut down my travel time to see my son, who may still be with Alice, from 40 minutes to just 10. With Alice, it's looking like we'll only have a co-parenting relationship for the sake of our son. It's a difficult situation, but I'm doing my best to make it work.